So the two biggest things that these new two lectures cover is the tracking, okay? And tracking is a huge part of doing any compositing, because in order for you to put something in the scene, you have to track it, okay? So the first one is dealing with what's called pixel tracking or planar tracking. Those are two different kinds of tracking methods. So here, here is a piece of footage that I have. I'm just going to slide my node graph over there. And I'm just going to hit play. And this is a piece of footage that I just grabbed off of YouTube. This is the Google crew went through the White House with their cameras, and they wanted to create like this 3D walkthrough of the White House. So here's the original piece of footage, and it's, I don't know, 2.5 minutes long. And I just went through After Effects and grabbed that section that I wanted, cut it out, exported it, brought it into Nuke, and then I can do whatever I want with it, render it out of here, and then I could drop it right back into After Effects, and you wouldn't be any wiser as to what I've done differently, okay? So this is a more advanced setup, okay? This is a setup where you're taking the tracking to the next step. But I'm going to show some of the features of just the basic tracker just so you get an understanding of what it can do. So I'm copying my piece of footage and just scooting it over. And it's going to be a little bit tricky to do on the screen, but we'll just do what we can. All right, so same piece of footage. There it is. Okay, so let's pretend that, where is it? Something over here. Let's say I want to put a piece of text over in this area that it said the White House, okay, whatever. So I could go in here and add text. Nuke does have a text tool. Text node, yes. Once it loads, I'm going to stop RealFlow from doing its thing. Striking out. There it goes. All right, there it is. Okay, so we have a text node, and I could take the text node and merge it with a my read node and view that, and then I would get my text somewhere in here after I type it. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and type my text, White House, and then I'm going to move my text over here. Okay. Now, even though my text is here, I can scale it and format it and do all the fun stuff you get to do with text. There we go. And I could set it on the bookshelf. There's no rotation on this, so I would just add a transform node to my text. And the transform node will allow me to rotate it. Come on. Too many things are open here, and it's not letting me do it. There we go. There it is. Okay. So I put it here. And now when I rewind it and I hit play, you'll see that the text is just floating here. It's not actually like moving with the video. So a lot of cases you want the text to move with the video so it doesn't look cheesy like this does. All right. So what we would do is we would track it. So I'm just going to ignore this stuff for now. So just set that off to the side. And we're going to add in a tracker. Okay. Now After Effects also has a tracker. After Effects has a pixel tracker. After Effects has a camera tracker. And if you grab a piece of footage from After Effects, like I have this piece of footage here, and then I go to, I think it's under Animation, I can go Track in Mocha AE right here, and Mocha AE is a planar tracker, all right? So that's the wrong program. There we go. So this tracker here is a pixel tracker. What it's going to try to do is it's going to try to find a pattern of pixels and figure out where that pattern of pixels is moving every single frame, okay? So after I create this tracker, I go up here to my trackers and I add a track, okay? Now I basically just set this on what I want to track. So I find an area that has some contrast. Let me close some of these other windows. There we go. So let's say I wanted to track this book here, okay? So I'm just setting up the region, and this thing has two areas. One area is this inner box. The inner box is like, this is the pattern I want you to track. And it's literally going through this, looking at the individual pixel colors, the pixel combination, and trying to find that pixel combination every single frame, okay? Now it would take forever. Imagine this is a bookshelf and it has several different books that look the same. So on this bookshelf it has this book that looks like this, but then on this bookshelf it has the same kind of pattern. All right, we don't want Nuke to try to track up here and try to track down there. It would jump around and get confused. So that's why they have this outer box. This outer box says, I just want you to look in this area for that pattern, okay? So as it's going to track this pattern in here along this area. So I'm going to hit the tracking button. I think I'm at the end. No, I'm in the middle-ish. So I'm going to go this way, and what you're going to see it do is it's going to go through and track. On this side here, this little box we have on the left, it's showing me what the tracking looks like. So now I can go back to frame 61, and I'm going to track it the other way. Okay, so it tracked from 61 to the end. Now it's going to track from 61 back to the beginning. And I can look at this and make sure that this thing is basically staying locked into where it's at. I'll show you after this track is done. It should be a good track. It looks like it's doing a pretty good job. The camera's not moving around a whole lot, so we're pretty safe bet that this isn't going to go crazy. But I'll show you what it's going to look like if we try to track a bad area and what's going to happen if we try to track a bad area. Okay, and depending on how big these boxes are, depending on the size of your footage, this could take it could take a few minutes. I've never had it take an hour, but usually like maybe 10 minutes is at the most for like 71 frames or so. All right, so now it's tracked it. So now as I hit play, you can see how this pretty much stays locked in. This little crosshair here stays pretty much locked to that same point throughout the duration of this footage. So if I realize I don't want that book there because it's like a politically incorrect book and I wanted to get rid of it, no problem. I have the tracking information, I have the movement, I can apply that to another piece of footage, okay? So now let's say I want to track something else just to show what a bad track would look like. So I'm going to go and add another track, and I'm going to disable the first track. If I don't disable this, it'll try to retrack number 1 while it's also tracking number 2, therefore making it go very slow. So here I'm going to track nothing, okay? I'm going to try to track this pixel pattern, and there's obviously that pixel pattern is that entire column. So I'll go back and I'll say track, and what we should see is this thing is just going to bounce all over the place. You can see how much movement we're getting here. It actually looks like it tracked it better than I thought it would. We'll find out. Okay, right there it stopped. When it stops, that means that, hey, I don't know where this next track is coming from. I need your help, or at least guidance that this is in the right spot. So I'm just going to say sure. Okay, so now I'm at the point where it's like, unsure every single frame. All right, so now as I look back at this, you can see how much that tracking spot is moving around. If you watch the edge of this, you can see that it's wiggling all over the place. Okay, so I'll apply the data from this one to something, and I'll apply the data from the other one to something just so you can see what it's going to look like. All right, so here's this, and here's the tracker. Now, as a tracking person, your job might just be to do this, make sure it's all tracked, make sure it's all nice and neat, and then pass this information off to someone else. If you're around here, most likely you're using the data, so you would take it to the next step and take it all the way basically to completion. So now that we have the tracking data for this, what we need to do is we need to output something. We need to send this information out there so we can use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on track 1, and I'm going to say to send this out as a transform. Okay? So what it's going to do is it's going to take my tracking information, basically the X and Y coordinates of this thing moving around, and it's going to output it into keyframes. Okay? So it's basically, I can copy the keyframes from this and paste them onto something else. So I'm going to say create, and now I have this little node that is all those keyframes of where that thing's moving. So on my text over here, if I want my text to move the same way that that little spot moved, all I do is just drop this in there. So now if we look at the merge, oops, there it is. Okay, I can see that the text is down here. Okay, I have my other transform that I can just nudge that back up this, I can rotate it. I wish it wouldn't snap. Let me double click, make sure that's on. You can also use your arrow keys if you did not know that, inside here. So it makes it very easy to kind of line things up. There we go. Okay. So now it's on that shelf, basically where the book is. We rewind it, we hit play, and now you can see that the White House text is actually following that book. Okay? Now there is a little bit of difference here in what's happening with our camera and what's happening with the text. One of the things that's happening is our camera is kind of jostling rotating left and right. Our text is not rotating at all. Okay? When you use one tracking point like we did on that book, we can't get rotation. It's not looking for that. All it's looking for is position. It's just moving the X and Y. It's basically like going frame by frame trying to figure out where this thing is moving. In order for us to get rotation, we would have to do 2 trackers and then output the rotation values of it. Okay? So in this case, I'm just going to leave it like that. All right, so let's go back to the tracker. And I'm going to go to track 2. I'm going to do the same thing. There it is. And I will copy this one. And then I'll merge that on top of this whole thing. Okay? So all I've done is use the same text, which is White House, and using new tracking data and merging that on top. Okay? Now I need another tracker just to kind of position it, or another transform to position it. So let me just set this to 1. There we go, it's much easier. And this was over on this wall, so I can rotate it. I'll just leave it there, doesn't matter. All right, let's just rewind this and watch the craziness ensue. Okay, so you can see how it's kind of floating. It's not really locked on the same way that the other one is. This one on the right is definitely locked on a lot better than this one is. There's a little bit of wiggle and a little bit of movement happening here. It looks like it's floating in front of the panel instead of being on the panel. Okay, it actually did a lot better job than I thought it would, tracking like the center of this. I thought it would just be bouncing all over the place, where it did not. So it's better, but it's still not perfect. You'll definitely experience this as you're going. As you're doing your stuff and as you're tracking your footage, you'll see that little thing just kind of wiggle, and then just jump off and go somewhere else. Okay? So you just have to be careful of that. So like I said, this is called just pixel tracking, going through, finding the little pattern that's inside the first box and trying to match it in the second box. Okay? Now I'm going to add another track just so we can see the rotation component of this. And I don't need to track it even on the same shelf. I could track an entirely different book, as long as it's on the same plane, essentially. All right, so we're going to track that one and see what happens. Okay. Now, when I talk about it being on the same plane, if we were to videotape me up here, this screen is on one plane. Okay. The front of this desk is on a totally different plane because it's on an angle like this and it's closer up. These things are going to move differently. That's what the tracker's trying to figure out, is how these things are moving in space. So I can't track something here and something way over there by you and expect to get good results. All right? That's when you could get into camera tracking, is when you do stuff like that. All right? And for some reason in Nuke the 8, those things keep popping on. So I'm just going to go back to this frame and track the other way. Okay, and again, this looks like it's a pretty good track. Those 2 points, if we were to kind of look at where they are in the real world, are about in the same spot, so they should be good. So now I can grab 1 and 3, and I'm going to tell it that I want to output the translate information and rotate information into a match move, and then create that. So there's number 3, and I will just delete or cut that one off of there and scoot this guy in. Okay, now again, this is going to be a bit subtler, but we will see that it's definitely going to be rotating a bit more. I think I closed our properties. Split. So now let's rewind and hit play. And now we can see this is definitely locked on a lot better, where we're seeing this thing and it's rotating with the bookshelf. It's a little bit off right here, but that could just be my movements that I had in there. Okay, it could just be the rotation of my camera. Now, there's also another one, is what if we were taking the camera and actually moving towards the source? Okay, the text should get bigger. So in that case, we would also want to export out scale, which is what that other node was on the far right side. So we can export the transformation, the rotation, and the scale information for these types of things. Okay? All right, so this is giving us basically transform, rotates, and scales. That's what the tracker node gives when I export it as a match move. I can also export it as a corner pin, which is what I show in the video. And essentially what a corner pin is going to do, scoot that out, is let's say, let me go back to one of these other images here. All right, let's say we had a piece of footage like this and we wanted to replace this image back here. We can track each one of those corners, export the tracking information for each one of those, and now our new piece of footage will automatically match right here, okay? Because when you have a piece of footage like this and your camera's moving, let's say, from one side to the other, scale isn't going to cut it, rotation's not going to cut it, and translation isn't going to cut it, okay? Because the perspective of that image is changing. So in that case, we use corner pin. So we track this corner, this corner, this corner, and that corner, and then we apply that information to a corner pin. So I'm just going to drop something into After Effects real quick, just so you can see inside here as well that there is a corner pin inside here. Distort, corner pin, somewhere. 1, 2, 3, thank you. Okay, and on this corner pin, you can see how I can distort this image. Okay, and I'm using a white solid, but obviously that could be anything.
So you can even put video in the picture?
You can put video. Anything that is in there, you could do. If you've ever seen the movie Harry Potter, where they had all those picture frames, and every single one of those picture frames had moving stuff on it, that's what they would do, is they would track all these picture frames and then replace it with an image. Okay? So something like this. So now all we're dealing with here is the position of each one of these points. By manipulating each one of these points and figuring out where those are moving, we're able to take that position information, apply it to the corner pins, and this will look like it's moving along with it. Okay? And that's when we used to go into Mocha, we would go into Mocha, export stuff out, and bring it in. The problem with this Mocha that's in After Effects is you can only bring it into After Effects. You can't take it out and put it into something else. There is a full-blown version of Mocha that you can do that to. Okay? In After Effects, under Effect, Distort. Okay? And then all we would do is, if you've had the After Effects class and you've written expressions or link stuff, there's the keyframe. We can just keyframe each one of these or take that tracking information and apply it to those areas to get it to track. Okay? So this is pixel tracking. Pixel tracking is a little bit, it's still used, but it's kind of like a last resort type thing. Okay? Planar tracking is one of the cool things to do, and then camera tracking is the best thing to do. And that's my own opinion. All right. So here is another piece. So let's say we wanted to track this piece of footage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, not that. I'm going to hit a roto, and I'm just going to outline a shape. Okay, now I don't know if it'll work on this piece of footage. Usually, because there's so many different ways to track, sometimes one tracker will work and another tracker will not work. Okay, it all depends on what the scene contains, how the footage is moving, ... All right, so I have this roto on here that I've outlined this area. I can right-click on it and say Planar Track. So now what this does is it takes this roto shape and it converts it into a piece of let's say a solid. It converts into a piece of a solid that Nuke will automatically try to figure out how it's moving. Okay? So instead of having just like finding these pixels, it's going to look at the shape of this and try to make sure that that shape moves with the camera correctly. So as I hit track here, It's right now just going along trying to match that thing up. All right. In this case, we're not going to see a huge difference. If you do any of the other assignments, or when you do the other assignments, obviously you're going to do the assignments, you can play with the picture replacement one, and that one I show the pixel tracking and the planar tracking. Okay. And sometimes that pixel tracking will work better than other times, and sometimes the planar tracking will work better than other times. And then when you get the tracking laptop and you're doing the camera move, you can also try those other camera trackers or all those other tracking methods on that as well. All right, so that track there, let's go back to here and track the other way. One of the great things about pixel or planar tracking compared to pixel tracking, imagine that we have something like this where we see part of the picture. Okay, imagine that this this picture frame is fully in the camera's view, and then as the camera's kind of wiggling around, it wiggles out of camera view. If you're doing pixel tracking, you can't track all four corners because all four corners aren't in the video the entire time. With planar tracking, you can do that. Planar tracking looks at the lines of this and tries to figure out how those lines are moving from frame to frame. So even if this thing went totally out of frame, it would still try to match it as it went out. Okay, and typically it does a pretty good job. All right, so now that we've done planar tracking on this, it looks like it held it pretty good. You'll see that if I double click the planar track, I get essentially the same kind of thing. I get a tracker that I could use, and I get corner pin that I could use as well. So let's just for fun, we'll just do corner pin, and I choose corner pin absolute. Yes. Okay. And again, I get a node, okay? And this node has to be connected to something. Right now, it just defaults, I don't know why, to connect to itself, which doesn't make sense, but just pop it off. Okay, there we go, good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in a color bars. There we go. Ooh, color wheel, that's funner. Color wheel. Okay, so I've dropped a color wheel on here, so if I look at what the color wheel looks like now, you'll see how it looks stretched out. All right. Let me get rid of my alpha channel. No alpha. And I'm just going to merge this on top of that. And I forgot a step, so I'm just going to delete this. And go back to that. There we go. Back to this. There we go. All right. So I've planar tracked it, and I forgot the other step, which is I have to line this up. Come on. This. Where's that? Okay. So now what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do, this, that. Oh, it's automatically jumping to that. I have to set this up to 2. There we go. Okay. Is I'm going to offset my points here. So this is where I've tracked it. It's figured out where that plane is, and now I'm moving those points to line it up with exactly what I want. So if I wanted just this bookcase, just this shelf here, I can use just this shelf. It's all on that same plane, so I've tracked this entire area because it's a better area to track, and I could replace whatever I want within that area. I could even replace something else over here completely off to the side as long as it's in the same plane. I could essentially track these squares here and replace something way down there if I needed to, okay, because it's all in that same plane. All right, so I have that. That's what I wanted. Now I'll take this and send it out. There it is. And we will disconnect it from here, drop it into this, look at the merge, and there it is. Okay, so now I've tracked this with a corner pin, dropped it right in there, and now, oh, of course, I didn't do it on the right frame, so it's not going to update. Just drop it back down to where it was. On these things, you have to be careful that you do everything in the right order, and I just wasn't being careful because I forgot the step. All right, let me fix this. Go to reference frame. There. And that's the other thing with this is, there we go. Okay. Because my stuff was shrunk, I couldn't see it. There we go. So now we're good. And now because these things are all connected, it's lined up perfectly. So now as I rewind and I hit play, and I can close that, you'll see that my piece of footage is now moving perfectly with the rest of that. Okay? Now as you watch these pieces of footage, always make sure that it goes through one time and plays out. Because Nuke will do this funny thing where it kind of like refreshes. So as I zoom in, zoom out, do all this stuff, and then I go back and I hit play, you'll see that sometimes it'll kind of stutter and it looks like it's like not lined up, but it's just refreshing. Okay? So let it play through, let the RAM cache it, and then you can see that that looks like now it's matching perfectly. It's moving with it exactly how we would want to move it with it. Okay, so that's what planar tracking is, and like I said, if these guys walked in front of this, we couldn't use pixel tracking because they're walking in front of it, because then the pixels can't be tracked. But with planar tracking, I could track just this area up here, figure out how that's moving, let the guys walk in front of it, and then I can extend that corner pin all the way down. Okay, so the possibilities for this are pretty much endless. It's just a matter of what you want to do with it. All right, now we're going to go into the crazy one. And with this one, here's what I'm doing. I'm not going to show the entire process because it's a bit long. But essentially what we're doing is we're taking this piece of footage and I'm cutting the guys out of it. Come on. There it is. So you see how I have this box around the guys? And that's just making sure that they're not inside there. Okay? Just like when we did, if you got to the key light yet, or you got to the keying assignment, how we had to kind of mask out some of the people that we didn't want to do. The same thing is happening here. We're cutting them out of this equation so that they don't get tracked while we track it. Okay? So then I'm going through and doing a camera tracker on this. And what a camera tracker is going to do is instead of us doing one point and then doing another point and then doing another point, the camera tracker goes through and it makes all of these points. Okay? It automatically goes out and finds all those points that it thinks are good tracking points, and it tracks them for us. And you'll see all these little X's right here are all these points that it found and said, hey, these are probably good tracking points. And then these ones here that are in green, or that are green in circles, those are the ones that it's using as an actual point to reconfigure what this looks like. Now here's the cool part about what I get after I'm done with the camera track, is I actually get a 3D view, and if I double click my camera, there's my actual camera. And you can see that this camera is now moving the way that my original camera was moving when I shot the footage. So if I'm out here and I'm kind of sweeping in and I'm showing, you know, whatever it is, my computer screen, it's going to do that. Okay? It's going to figure out how was that camera originally moving, and it's going to create that camera for us. Once we have this, it's open. The entire world is open to us as to what we want to do with it. In this case, what I've done, it's kind of hard to see out here because there's only a few points, but what I've done is I've gone through this little tool called Model Builder. And on Model Builder, if I hit the correct button combination, this, make sure I view it, make sure I go through there. There we go. Okay. What Model Builder allows me to do is create simple pieces of geometry. And all I've done is create a simple piece of geometry, line up the corners, and Nuke takes care of the rest. Okay? It automatically will go through and figure out how these things are supposed to be moving with what's on the plate. All right? So as an example, let's say I wanted to, I've tracked it, and I've tracked this plane, I've tracked this plane, I want to track something over here. So I'm going to go and create a new card. There it is. And I'm just going to line up the corners. And I'm just going to estimate that that corner is about there. Okay, so that's basically, it's lined up that corner. Let me check this one. There we go. And then I'm going to go back to like frame 30 and then just reline these up.
that may be in front of it.
Doesn't care.
Okay.
That's why when I cut the guys out, oops, I don't want to move that one. That one's probably already good. When I cut the guys out, it automatically doesn't track them. So as long as it can get enough information as to how the camera's moving, it's wide open. All right. So now that I've set a couple frames here, let me rewind it. Oops, I can probably scoot this down a nudge. Scoot this over. Sometimes it needs just a couple extra frames just to get that point, get that thing lined up. All right. So now I'm hitting play. Again, I'm letting it go through. I'm letting it cache, and then I can look at it and see if it's a good solve. And it looks like it's an okay solve. It could be a little bit better. Get really right at the end. I get a little bit more bookcase here. Then maybe I could pull that out some. Okay. But right now, that's created a piece of geometry in 3D. Let me switch my camera off. Here's that piece of geometry in 3D that I could then take into Maya or take into wherever and do whatever I want with it. I can make an image and bring it in After Effects. Okay. So what I've done with this is I went through Model Builder and I could say, okay, I want to take card 3 and I want to bake it. And what that does, it gives me this little card. It actually gives me a piece of geometry. And then I could write the geometry out and bring it into Maya. Okay. There's my camera, there's my scene, there's my scanline render. Here's all this other fancy stuff. Let me jump into Maya. And I'll hide that. There it is. Okay. So here's that bookshelf that I made, or the bookshelf that I had on the right. This guy right here. There it is. Back to Maya. So now whatever I want to do to this, I can do to it inside here. I could have a bunch of little army people running around on the bookshelves, and then I could render it out and bring it back into Nuke. I could keep this just like it is, make like a big vortex hole, render it out and bring it into Nuke. I could do whatever I want to this, render it out, bring it into Nuke, or bring the geometry back into Nuke. If I created a bunch of spheres, wonderful. And then I went through and I exported this. Export selection. Oops, not export selection. Just select it first. Export selection as an FBX. FBX is your transporter from back and forth. And then from Maya. There we go. Yes. Go back into Nuke. Go back to my geometry that I read in. Nope, right here. And then I reload it. And now I have this. I don't know why the balls didn't show up. I didn't like something about those spheres. They're too complex, maybe. Should be good. Export selection from Maya, yes. Reload it. Oh, there it is. It's only reading one of them. Let me do one more thing. I'll combine this and then I'll export it. Then I'll reload it. There it is. Now it's hard to see, but they are there. You can see the little cubes that have popped in from this. And I'm able to texture it right here. So right now it's using the checkerboard. I can have it be green. And now it's going to be green. And I could even throw inside of Nuke. I could throw a light into my scene. now that should be by surface, yes. Reloaded, yes. My green just might be too bright for it to read anything. I don't know why it's not working, but essentially it's wide open for us to keep playing with this thing and eventually get something that, you know, could match perfectly inside here. And what I've also done is, obviously, in order for this bookcase thing to work, I had to cut off part of it. Okay, so this area here on my node graph, this is all this just a an alpha channel of this front plane. This over here is that back plane. This is the front plane. And then I merge them together to get it to cut out. So you can see how I've cut off part of this and then put those two pieces together to create that. I have to look at that and see why it's not reading my light the way it should be reading the light. Point light, read from file, intensity. Yeah, that's odd. Have something clicked or not clicked. Okay, so this is what the camera tracker can do. We can even export our camera out, bring our camera into Maya, and play with that as well. There's also a program that eventually we'll get into called PF Track. And PF Track does essentially what I've just discussed. Okay, it essentially allows us to go through, track a piece of footage, export out a camera and a little scene, then bring that into Maya and bring that into Nuke, and then start doing all that work. Okay. After Effects also has a 3D camera tracker inside here. Well, it's like a fake camera tracker, but if we go into, I believe it's under animation. It's not there. There it is, track camera. Okay. We can track a camera right inside of After Effects. The only downside is we don't get a piece of geometry. Okay. If we're just dropping in text or just dropping in a basic object into the scene, we can do that through the 3D camera tracker. But the second we try to get fancier and do something where we're taking an actual piece of geometry or taking the camera anywhere else, we can't do that from After Effects. Okay. So a lot of times you'll go to a program like Nuke where you can export your geometry, you can export your camera. Or you'll go to PF Track where you can export your camera and you can export geometry. Even Mocha Pro allows you to export to several different formats. After Effects being able to only do it inside here is kind of very, very limiting. Okay. So just as you start getting into it, this is what I'm going to be doing in the one, is I have this like liquidy thing. And it's going super slow. But what it's going to do is just kind of fill up this box with water, and I'll have that over in the corner, maybe put fish or something in it. Okay? But tracking is one of those skills, just like rotoscoping, where it's really essential. And it actually, if you can do really good tracking, it makes rotoscoping much easier, because if you needed to rotoscope this picture out because you needed to take it out, then all you have to do is track it, pop it out, and you're good. Okay? Or if you needed to rotoscope whatever, these books because you can't really see them and you needed to add something else in there, or you need to bright something or darken something or whatever, you can do that pretty easy if you know some tracking stuff. Okay, so those are the next two videos that are up on the server. They're also on Angel, so you can get to them from there. But make sure you're staying on task with these. A lot of you have shown me the 3D compositing one. I think I've seen one keying and compositing one. So just make sure you're keeping on task with these things. We're already at the end of week 4, and we're just going to keep moving as we go, okay? And I think we have about 4 more assignments left, but they're going to start getting more and more complex, compiling all the stuff that we're already doing, using rotoscoping, using tracking, using all this footage that we've been doing, okay? Any questions? Yes, sir.
So they don't bring the textures from Maya into,
you can. Yeah, you can take, oops, let me jump into Maya. So right inside here, it doesn't allow me to export the textures also. But what I could do is say, let's say I wanted a wood texture. All I'd have to do inside of Nuke, not RealFlow, is just go to read.
Just read in the text.
Yeah, just find the texture that I want from here. I don't know if I have anything. Sure, I have a picture of Pac-Man. There's a video of Pac-Man. So we'll just put Pac-Man on our geometry. There it is. And now our lighting's working. So it was definitely that constant. And now that I'm remembering it, the constants don't light up. Okay, so now I have a video of Pac-Man that I put on there. Now all my UVs that I had set up inside Maya automatically translate into Nuke. So if I wanted to do something fancy, I have to make sure my UVs are set up. Okay, I saw a video from FX PhD where they take and they do everything inside Nuke. It's like they model it inside Maya, they get it good, and they export that model, bring it into Nuke, and they do all the texturing there, and they do basically all the lighting and everything else. Okay, so they're basically skipping the 3D step and or the Maya step and bringing it right into Nuke to do all the final compositing stuff. All right, so this is a hugely powerful tool, and this is something that's available just recently within the last version or two of Nuke. So I think 7 introduced the camera tracker in there in the model builder. But they have lots of cool abilities there, and the website for the Foundry on YouTube has a really cool tutorial where they go through and they show this car coming around the corner, and they track the scene, and they replace some of the not replace the buildings, but track the buildings, and you can see where it can really be helpful. If I have a character who's walking out from a building, and instead of me having to go through and rotoscope where that wall is, I can track the camera, create a couple pieces of dummy geometry, and have the guy walk out of there. That's A+4. Of course, when you want to go right to it, it's never there. The Foundry camera tracker. This is a newer one. This is the Nuke 8 one. Okay, but essentially what they're doing is they're taking this piece of footage and they're tracking it, and then they could replace something if they wanted to. They could take one of these windows out if they wanted to. They could have the window look shattered or whatever, replace it with a new image from Photoshop, anything. I'm going to show you this really cool thing while we're at it. So here, oops. Let's go a little bit further up. There we go, something like that. All right, so the movie Black Swan, has anyone seen Black Swan, the movie? Okay, so it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Every time they had the stage where they had these ballerinas dancing on the stage, they did not do any prep work to the stage. So basically people would walk on it with their shoes, they would do whatever, and the stage was filthy. So they went through every single scene that had the stage in it, and they erased the stage, made a brand new CG stage, put their own reflections, put their own shadows, put all that other stuff, the scratches and scuffs that they wanted back in there. In order to do that, they have to literally cut out each person that's inside here, make the ground, and then do all that other work. Okay? So imagine that feat, how easy that is when you look at the fact that we could track that stage and then do a little bit more work to replace it a little bit easier than having to go through and do some of the other stuff. And then obviously there's another shot of the stage. I'll spoil it. I think the opening dance probably had some. There, you can see how clean. It's hard to see on the projector, obviously. Yes, it is. The floor is like immaculate. There's not like a spot on the floor that they don't want on this floor. So this is a CG floor that you're looking at. Okay, and this is the kind of work. Tracking and rotoscoping are two of the things that, as an entry-level compositor, the kind of job that you would get, because it's basically grunt work. It's basically you going through and making sure that every single frame of that movement is perfect, okay? So that might mean, in some cases, why do I keep jumping there? In some cases, you're literally going from frame 24 to 25 saying, I'm not sure that that top left corner is exactly where I want that top left corner to be. So then you have to nudge it by hand and then tweak it and see if it looks good. And then go up a couple frames and then make sure it's still looking good there. All right. There are some things. There was one guy who had to do on Transformers. There you go. So this scene here took, not that scene, this scene. There it is. This scene here took 3 months for them to create. 2 seconds in the film took 3 months for them to create this kind of thing, because this is all drawn by hand. And every single frame that they do, they have to make sure that it matches, that all these lines and breakaways and everything are looking the exact way they need it to look. So one artist worked solely on the little skin plates around Alice's mouth, each of these 50 or so pieces hand animated frame by frame to create the short effect. Artists applied extra texture along the tiles with displacement, and so on and so forth. And then that's the end result. I wish it would stop doing that. Okay? But this is the kind of stuff that you'll do, and then sometimes you'll do something like this, and they'll say, you know what, we're not going to use that scene. So you work for 3 months, and they're just like, nope. So, obviously a little disheartening, but that's the way it goes, okay? But the more tools you have under your belt for tracking, the better tracker you are, the easier a lot of these things get made, okay? Any other questions? Nope. All right.